What is up, guys? It is another episode of Modern Meta Breakdown. This time around, we're going to be talking about Tron. People were requesting it. Some people talked about it on Twitter. Some people talked about it in the last episode. So I figure, why not? Since Tron has changed a bit since the last time we talked about it. So if you guys didn't see our previous episode, you guys can check that out. We did kind of do breakdown stuff of what the meta was like in 2017 and 2018 for Modern, but there's been a lot of new cards. We talked about it last week with how different sets that have come out, especially this summer, had a big impact on the deck. So if you missed that previous episode, you can check that out. It was mainly focusing on Modern Horizons and War of the Spark, and talking about the decks that have kind of cropped up since then. So like the Phoenix decks, the Hogak stuff, but it also had an impact on other decks. I talked briefly last episode about Blue-White Control getting a lot of Planeswalkers, and Tron also got a new Planeswalker, and you're already thinking, well, it had Planeswalkers before. Where did we kind of find the slots to make it work? Really, the kind of consensus is Mono Green is the most consistent and powerful version at this moment in time based on how the meta is working for Tron. So we'll talk about two decks and see that there's not much flexibility in the list as of right now. There are some spots that are still available for people to kind of do those tweaks and adjustments to, but we're going to hop in and talk a little bit about some of these decks here. So first one that we're going to talk about was able to get first place here, and you can see already kind of the list, the breakdown here, and we're going to talk a little bit about the lands to start with, which is a little bit different from some of the other decks that we talk about, but the main focus of this deck is to be able to get a bunch of mana, and not just like mana ramp like Scapeshift or something like that. It's designed to be able to have 3 lands that give you a bunch of mana. So we can see already on the screen, Urza's Tower is one of them. If you happen to have the 3 Urza lands, Urza's Tower, Urza Power Plant, and Urza Mine, you're able to generate 7 mana off of those 3 lands. The Tower will give you 3, Power Plant gives you 2, and Mine will also give you 2. So you need to have all 3 of them on the battlefield in order for that to happen. So you can see it's running about 19 lands. You spend a good chunk of that dedicated to your Tron pieces, as they're referred to. And then you have those kind of flex spots in your land, those utility lands that can be beneficial. Sanctum of Ugin helps you to be able to find threats later on. We've got Ghost Quarter. Everyone should know what Ghost Quarter does. Destroying something seems pretty good. Blast Zone is a newer addition. We talked about some kind of War of the Spark additions. That is one of those, which is pretty powerful card when you think about it. It comes in with one of those charge counters, and you kind of get to blow it up, if you will. Destroy all non-land permanents with converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters. Should sound a little bit familiar for all of you artifact fans out there. So that is designed to kind of help you stay alive a little bit. Maybe you're kind of hurting on your Tron pieces. Maybe they've been blown up a little bit, and just kind of help you against those low to the ground decks. And then we've got just kind of 4 forests thrown into the mix because there are a lot of green spells that you're going to be wanting to cast. So let's talk about the spells, then we'll talk about creatures and planeswalkers and kind of get you an idea of how this works. So the deck kind of has these cyclers, mana rock cyclers, if you will, that you can be able to pay 1, get a mana off of it, and draw a card. So that would be our spheres and our stars. So you have to be able to sack it to get that green mana. It's often used as a cycling effect, so you can draw a card, generate that green mana to be able to cast Ancient Stirrings or Sylvan Scrying, which we'll be talking about next as our kind of land finders here. But these are the kind of tried and true. You'll see a playset in each list for both sphere and star, because being able to draw cards outside of blue is pretty nice. So having these artifacts that also help generate mana, they thin out your deck. You know, it's very nice abilities that kind of help you speed things along to get to your next step. Then we've got kind of our nice set of what can I do to find the lands that I need. It's all about trying to get that Tron online, all 3 lands up and running, so you can be able to start casting the big stuff. So we've got kind of many different ways to do it. We've got our just find a land off the top, Ancient Stirrings, which most people should be familiar with. It's one of the most powerful spells in Modern. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. Can reveal a colorless card, which includes lands and or artifacts, depending on what you might need. Put it into your hand, rest in the bottom. Cool. So that's not a specific, I need to find a specific card, but that helps me to be able to find powerful cards. I could find a threat with it. I could be able to find a missing land. I could be finding an artifact, whatever I might need. Then we've got our ones that are specific for finding lands, which are our Sylvan Scrying, which pay 2, search your library, find a land, sweet. And then Expedition Map, same thing, pay 2, sack it, search your library for a land, reveal it, put it into your hand. Now, a lot of people might start out turn 1 Expedition Map or turn 1 Star or Sphere. That's a nice opening for a Tron list to be able to go for. And then turn 2, they'll be like, all right, cool, here's my second land, I'll sack it, find my last Tron piece, and on turn 3, I get to be able to cast one of my big guys. So nice little kind of setup and how you might expect to be playing against this sort of list. So let's hop over and talk about our creatures. As you can see, we've got our normal colorless stuff. Wormcoil is here, Ulamog's here, which is what most people are familiar with when they see Tron. This number here fluctuates. I think that's one of the easier ones that changes between that 2 and 3 number. It's rare as of right now with the meta that it does not go below 2. It's still really good being able to have that life link. The death touch is relevant there, and you get to generate more creatures off it if it dies. Ulamog is kind of the big guy, right? I often refer to him as the game ender, because if you play him, most likely 9 times out of 10, your opponent's just going to be scooping up because they can't be able to stop this. If it resolves, awesome. It's got a cast trigger that lets you exile 2 things, so even if they counter it, you're still going to get rid of 2 permanents. Could be lands, could be planeswalkers, creatures, whatever that are on the battlefield. And then when he attacks, doesn't matter if he deals damage, which he's already at 10-10, which is scary, but if he attacks, you mill your opponent for 20. He's going to be ending the game if he sticks around, so you got to be careful about that. Oh, and he's indestructible, so it's going to be really hard to remove him. Emrakul is the other creature that is in here. We've seen fluctuations. Some lists run him, some don't. I think it's more of that flex spot preference at this point in time. But he's that 13/13, and he gets to be reduced his cost for each card type in your graveyard. So if you have creatures, if you've got lands, if you've got artifacts, sorceries, instants, whatever you might have in there, he's going to be cheaper to cast. So that helps out because you should be able to get a good mix of things into your graveyard to make him a little bit cheaper. So when he enters the battlefield, you are able to gain control of target opponent during that player's next turn. He's also got flying, trample, protection from instants. So yeah, the player gets to take an extra turn after all that, but he's just a nice way to kind of mess with things, because if they have a bunch of creatures and they're like, I don't know if I want to attack now, and then, I'll take control, you're going to attack, I'll just block with my Emrakul and your creatures are going to die. So some lists run them, some don't. Again, preference. I've seen some lists run other variations of Ulamog and run 2 instead of just the Emrakul. The other guy here, Thragtusk, which has been adjusted. Sometimes we saw him mainly in the sideboard, and now he's become a main deck creature. The life is relevant. Being able to get more creatures is relevant. It's another one where he only costs 5. So on those weird matchups where you're stumbling, you're not able to get Tron assembled, and you just have to kind of keep surviving and surviving until you can get up to 7 mana and play it like a normal deck, he's really powerful, right? Being able to have a 5/3, I gain 5 life, and I can just chump block something, and now I have another 3/3 that lets me chump block again, so I can just kind of help delay the game until I can get up to the powerful stuff that I'm looking for, get to the Wormcoils, get to the Ulamogs, get to the Planeswalkers. And we're going to talk a little bit about our Planeswalkers here. So if you notice, I skipped one of our spells down there, and that is because I want to tie it in with one of our Planeswalkers here. So let's pop over and talk. Here are the 2 spells that we kind of skipped over. Oblivion Stone and Ugin the Spirit Dragon here. My chair is super squeaky today. So these are our board wipe protection stuff. It kind of goes along with our Blast Zone, if you will, if you want to kind of fit all of that into that category. So Oblivion Stone, you can see you can put fate counters to help protect your stuff, but costs 3 to be able to put it out, and really it's just, hey, if you have 5 mana, you're going to be able to destroy all non-land permanents that don't have a fate counter on them. So it's basically just saying, get rid of all Planeswalkers, get rid of all artifacts, get rid of all creatures, enchantments. None of that's sticking around. Hope you're ready for this. And if you're playing Tron, oftentimes you can be like, all right, turn 3, I can have this out. Seems pretty good. On turn 4, if I'm sitting there with a forest and all 3 Tron pieces, I can play it and blow up the field. So like if you're thinking about that relevance of how quickly you can be able to wipe the board, that is pretty quick. Same thing in that regard. If on turn 4 you have all 3 Tron pieces and a forest or any other of your lands that you might have, you can be able to cast Ugin, which is another one of those I can wipe the board. So the wipe the board effect that he's got is his -X ability, which for each permanent you can be like, all right, my opponent's sitting there and I'm playing against a let's say a Jund list, and they're sitting here with a bunch of green creatures out there. They've got Tireless Tracker, they've got Tarmogoyf, things like that, and they've got a Liliana the Veil. So I can look at that and go, okay, looks like you have a bunch of stuff. Nothing is above 3 converted mana cost. So I'm going to -3 on my Ugin, and each permanent that you have with converted mana cost 3 or less, that is a colored permanent, you have to get rid of it. Look at that. All of your board's now gone. So another really powerful one. And then it just can snowball from there. You wipe the board, and then you can just be like, all right, +3, +3, +3. I can shoot you in the face. I can shoot your creatures that you play. And then eventually if I get up to 10 loyalty, which is not that hard to do, I get to draw a bunch of cards, gain a bunch of life, and then put a bunch of permanents onto the battlefield. I can draw into Ulamog and just start playing him. Seems pretty good. So Ugin is another one of those really scary planeswalkers, but he is a little bit more expensive. Kind of goes along with that Ulamog. Ugin and Ulamog, Emrakul, those are your kind of very, very, very top ends. And if you're stumbling on your lands, they can be a little bit annoying. But I wanted to highlight those because of that. Now let's talk about the other planeswalker here, the newest edition. So we've got the Great Creator. Once they found out that he can find artifacts from the sideboard, it helped to adjust and change the way that Tron was building their list. It no longer became a deck of, here's just the 60 cards that I have, and let's hope this is good enough, and I'm just going to draw what I need to get you. Now it becomes, here is my 70 card deck that I can be able to fluctuate numbers through, and I don't have to worry about specific silver bullets in the main board now, because I can just find them for 4 mana. And that involves his -2 ability. You can be able to choose an artifact card you own outside the game in your sideboard, and you can be able to reveal that card and put it into your hand. Seems pretty good. The +1 of it is not really relevant for this list. Every now and again you might see it. Till the end of your turn, up to 1 target non-creature artifact becomes an artifact creature with power and toughness equal to its converted mana cost. Every now and again you might see someone do it, but it's really not what he's for. It's really just a tutor effect. The other line of text at the very top, that kind of passive planeswalker ability, something that they've added in, is that activated abilities of artifacts your opponent control can't be activated. Why is that relevant, Nan? Well, because there are ways to turn things into artifacts. Liquid metal coating, Microsynth Lattice. So these are the two shut down my opponent cards. So the liquid metal coating I'm going to talk about because it's super cheap and easy to cast. So on those turns where you might be able to cast Karn and then still have 2 mana left over, you can be able to throw this down, and if you really need a specific thing, shut down next turn, because target permanent becomes an artifact in addition to its other types until the end of turn. So on your opponent's turn, before they get to draw and do things, right, you can be able to just say, hey, that's an artifact now, and you can't activate any of its abilities. Enjoy. The other one, if we're looking down at the bottom this way, Microsynth Lattice. Costs 6 mana, so it is a little bit expensive, so you need to be able to have Karn and have enough mana to cast that in 1 turn to kind of shut down your opponent from being able to play anything else the rest of the game. And why is that a possibility? Well, all permanents are artifacts in addition to other types. That means that your lands that your opponent has now are going to be artifacts. And you cannot activate the abilities of them. You cannot tap them for mana anymore. So all cards that aren't on the battlefield, spells, permanents, all that are colorless, and players can spend mana as though it were mana of any color. But if your opponent can't tap their lands for mana, they can't cast anything. So then it just becomes, can I protect my Karn to prevent you from being able to cast any more spells? And so you really have to get into that position where you have done your board wipe effects, you've been able to use your Ugin, you've been able to use your Oblivion Stones, wipe the board, land Karn, find Microsynth Lattice, play that, now you're locked out. How are you going to beat that when you can't cast anything? So that is now an ability that the Tron list have that did not exist previously. That ability to kind of say, I'm just done playing with you. All right. Some of the people have played previously where they've used Karn Liberated and they've just been like, all right, I'm just going to control the battlefield with him. You know, I'll exile this permanent. I'll keep upticking, getting rid of cards from your hand, and then I'm just going to reset the game, and we'll just have fun like that. And people are like, oh, no, nobody likes that. But, you know, Karn's just too powerful not to be running. That's why we see full play sets of both in the list. And our Planeswalkers numbers never really change. Every now and again you might see one less Ugin here and there, but really you have to see the 4 Karn Liberated and 4 Karn the Great Creator because of the tutor effects that the Great Creator has, and because of on turn 3 your ability to just kind of get rid of something is pretty good. Then it just kind of deviates and they have to deal with Karn Liberated, because if they don't, he can also snowball and you just start chipping away cards at your opponent's hand, getting rid of important permanents. I mean, you can basically say, if you leave him alone for 2 turns, I can get rid of 2 important permanents that you have. And if I decide that I only care about one of your permanents, then that means he gets to stick around and I get to start stealing cards from your hand. So he is tough to deal with. Karn Great Creator, less loyalty, right? He drops down to only 3 loyalty after you tutor something, so he is a little bit easier to deal with and you have a little bit more time. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the cards that exist in the sideboard that you might be able to find with the Great Creator, not just lockout cards. So other things, Ensnaring Bridge, maybe you're playing against an aggro deck, you can be able to kind of bring that in to your list. Sorcerer's Spyglass, hey, there's a lot of Planeswalkers that exist, seems pretty good. Trinisphere, nobody likes that card except for people playing it, right? No. So it basically says any spell that you're going to cast that costs less than 3 now costs 3. Enjoy. So that's not fun. Walking Ballistas in here. I've seen some lists run a Walking Ballista in the main board and have less Thragtusk. It really is kind of that preference of what your meta is like and how that's kind of going. And that's kind of the tutor effects that exist for Karn to be able to find. Now, there are some other cards in the list, one of which is kind of this new spell, Veil of Summer. I've even seen it run in Infect list. I run 3 in my board personally. So you get to draw a card if your opponent casts a blue or black spell. If we're looking at people that are trying to be doing that control stuff, the blue-white control, cool, checks that box off. If you're playing against Jund or those sort of lists, hey, they played a black spell. Sweet, I can be able to draw a card. Also, the other line of text that matters the most for this, not just drawing cards, is that spells you control can't be countered this turn, and you and permanents you control have hexproof. That means all your lands have hexproof. That means you have hexproof. You are safe. You don't have to worry. So if they're going to sit here and try to ghost quarter your stuff, you can just be like, sorry, not sorry. I'm going to keep my lands alive. So really, really important there. Nature's Claim. Hey, I need artifact removal. Makes sense. Dismember, creature removal. Makes sense. Leyline of Sanctity is more of that preference thing. Not everybody needs to run it. Some people, based on their meta, how things are going, what is looking like, people run Leyline. I want to show you another list real quick that does not run that. So it does have some other silver bullets. It's running more Artifact Hate, kind of to deal with more of the Urza style of things. You can also look that it's running 2 of the Ulamogs, but no of our Emrakul in here. Torpor Orb is in this list as well. Creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger. Okay, cool, makes sense. More Nature's Claim. It's running an extra Oblivion Zone. So this is kind of more effects that it can run to kind of help it out. Warping Whale is also in this list, which is one of those that tends to kind of fluctuate based on the meta. Exiling a creature with power or toughness 1 or less is pretty good, especially when you're playing against a list that is running Urza, because he's a 1/4. So getting rid of that is very relevant. Countering a sorcery spell, and then you get to make a Scion, which every now and again does become relevant. So you see that this list in particular has tweaked and adjusted a lot more for the Urza lists that are running around. And we will be able to talk about that in the future. But I did want to highlight that there are some flex spots, but not as many. You can see that this one is running 1 extra Oblivion Stone in the board because it's only running 2 in the main board. That way it can be able to fit in some relics. It shaved off of Emrakul and it shaved off of an Oblivion Stone because it wanted to have some relics in here. Relics are a nice card because you can start chipping away at specific cards. You get to be able to draw a card off it, just like Chromatic Sphere or Star. But it also helps protect you against those Urza lists that are trying to sit there and throw their swords into their graveyard and do all that sack effects. So I think having those in there, it makes a lot of sense. But again, you have to adjust your list based on the meta at your specific shop. All right, you can do a combination of the two that I've showed you if you're going to be going to bigger events, and just kind of keep an eye on the meta and what's going on there. But that is it for this list, guys. A little bit more in depth, a little bit more talking this time around than previous episodes, so I hope you enjoyed it. The quicker decks do tend to do better against Tron. Infect is one of those that does really well. If you're a slower, more mid-rangey deck like Jund, you're going to have a harder time because as the game progresses, where Jund might get that grindier and do better against some decks, Tron just gets better because, hey, we're grinding it out, we're running low on resources, but my top deck of an Ulamog or my top deck of Karn is more relevant than your top deck of a Tarmogoyf or your top deck of a Tireless Tracker or even a Liliana, right? So that's why this does a lot more better against those sort of lists. So, you know, being kind of more combo-y, more quicker, you have a better chance of being able to take out the Tron list. So thanks so much for tuning in and watching, guys. I hope you all enjoyed this episode of Modern Meta Breakdown. Please let me know what decks you'd like me to discuss going forward. We had a couple people requesting Tron, so I figured that would be the perfect one to start things out with. You know, you can be able to check out all the content that I do. You can see the links up in the top corner up there, at The Real Nan Man on Twitter. You can see also down below, I guess, all that stuff. Nan Man is the YouTube channel, and at The Real Nan Man on Twitch as well. So check out all that stuff. Hit the follows, hit the subscribes. If you're questioning whether you want to subscribe on YouTube, remember, it's just like following on Twitch, right? It doesn't cost you any money. So if you like the content, feel free to show your support and love for it by hitting that subscribe button. But again, we're going to be hopping over, going to be talking about some other decks in the future. So if you like a specific deck or want to know more details about it, let me know in the comments below and we'll make sure to be able to highlight that. But thanks for tuning in and watching, guys, and we'll catch you guys next game.